World building, a word you've probably heard me say quite a bit if you're familiar with my reviews or any review of any source of fictional media for that point. What do I mean when I talk about world building and what makes it so fundamentally important to video games today? Well, this video intends to explain just that. Today I'll be going through one of the more interesting game aspects that you'll find across any top performing game, along with going into detail with a few examples from some of my favourite games. But before I dive straight into the deep end, let's establish the meaning of world building. World building is the process of constructing a setting for your story, whether that's in video games or in media such as books. As good as your story may be, if you're unable to create a stage to tell that story, it may not be well received. As such, creative minds, whether that's developers, concept artists, and authors, all work extensively to make sure that this part of a whole package is one that has no pieces missing. Some of the main points I look for in a game that has strong world building is the environments and how diverse they are. What is the culture like in said environments and the history surrounding these areas? Or maybe if we're looking at it from like a fantasy standpoint, for example, how does magic work? Is it like Final Fantasy 16 where it slowly turns you to stone, or is it an endless flow of no consequence? While these factors may seem small, they make a massive difference in the story you're telling and how responsive a player is to this situation. And lastly, there needs to be consistency. If one area is super expansive and elaborate, and then let's say the following areas that cover the next 3 hours of gameplay are incredibly bland and lackluster, that will negatively impact the story you're telling and may damage the player's experience. So in that sense, you want to make sure that all environments are set and held to a good standard. Now, you're probably asking, how do you go about building a world from scratch? Well, I couldn't tell you because I'm not a creative mind, but I think there'll be two ways I would approach it, and it partially depends on what you've already established. Let's run with this idea that you've already got an established story, or you've got a character you've been working on for a while. Work around that. You've already focused on establishing some ideas, or maybe even the design if we're working on characters first. Use that as fuel to push your ideas and run with it. My other idea would be to establish the context, or I guess the lore first. If you can create an expansive background to your story, then it'll be easier to then execute world building if you already know how you want to approach it. Again, I'm not someone with experience with this kind of stuff. This is how I would approach it if I was thinking about going into game development or I wanted to become an author, but I still consider these things when reviewing games. What I would say is, even though I mentioned creating story ideas first, from a player perspective, it's important to avoid over-explaining themes and concepts and allow them to naturally be built upon as you move around the world. There have been a few games where I felt like the story was really good, but it was rushed to explain so many themes at once that even having one large exposition becomes overwhelming to the player, which could be damaging to the overall experience. So, as good as it is for me to talk about concepts and ideas, it'd be better for me to show you some actual examples from 3 games that I think are excellent at world building and creating an unforgettable experience. Firstly, I wanted to look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I wanted to start with this game in particular because it was the game that made me want to talk about world building and how important it is. Admittedly, I was torn between covering Chrono Trigger and this game, but in the end I felt like there was more to discuss here, so here we are. Anyway, let's tackle each point in detail. Firstly, the story has so much depth to it. It does go in a different direction to the original, and that in itself is quite divisive, but I personally really enjoyed it. There is so much attention to detail with it, and the extent that the context is built into the game through stuff that I'll discuss in a minute. The world building for Final Fantasy VII is also supported by other spin-off games such as Crisis Core and Dirge's Cerberus to create such an expansive and rich story. I thought Rebirth's execution was the best through its design and what it offers. The environments are always one of the main things people will assess when playing an open world game, which is why I wanted to start with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. This game is so incredibly diverse of its environments. Each area has so much individual charm, whether you're exploring Kalm and the grasslands for the first time, to the mountains in Nibelheim, or even the jungle in Gongaga.
Me? Gungaga.
They're all so diverse, which is what makes them all so memorable. Every enemy challenge is different with its own requirements. World intel tasks, while conceptually similar across each region, they're all diverse and offer intriguing story pieces which further expand on the story. Although it's quite contentious, the game features a vast amount of minigames. I thought they worked quite well to further expand the regions, and especially the Queen's Blood card game. On its own, it's an incredibly fun game, but including NPCs and a tournament really helped with immersion and build that competitive nature that helps you take things more seriously. However, what I failed to mention earlier when establishing the principles of world building was that I think sound design also works quite well in establishing a strong world. The music that accompanies the environment and just throughout the game in general are incredibly important, with Rebirth having some of the best in video game history. I just wanted to include that clip because I love exploring Gungaga so much, and what's even better is that the soundtrack literally just came out in streaming services, or at least as I'm recording right now. While the music alone can play a big part in making a game more memorable, the real difference maker is the sounds that are underappreciated, more environmental sounds that make the world feel more alive, how different footsteps sound on different surfaces, does an item you're interacting with have any sound. Although it's quite a small thing in the moment, it plays a big part in maintaining immersion and a standard of realism that many games try to reach nowadays. As much as I could talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for hours, it would do us some good if we looked at another example, and also considering I've already reviewed the original and both remake entries, you might be surprised that I didn't start this section with looking at this game, but The Witcher 3 is regarded as one of the best story games with one of the most in-depth worlds available. Although The Witcher 3 is almost 9 years older than Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, it set the standard for incredible world building, with so few games coming close to this game's level of detail even today. Let's go through this a little further. Firstly, an incredible world design. Given the setting of the game, it does such a good job with feeling natural while still maintaining that rich fantasy theme. The cities throughout the world show signs of that medieval and Renaissance charm while still having an excessive amount of poverty and famine, with the rest of the lands being the aftermath of war and horrors from monsters that compete for the same resources as the humans and witchers, setting a perfect stage for an incredible story to be told. Let's look at the quests that are available in the game, because there are a lot. In fact, there are so many that it's broken up into main quests and secondary quests. Secondary quests are one that can be found throughout the world and almost act as a small complete story on its own. They're relatively short and quick to complete, but they work wonderfully to further build the world. The main quests are a bit more expansive and allow the world building to be shown and built upon as you actively complete these quests, and progressing the story without completing said quests can sometimes fail them, so the quests have actual implications on the story, which I think is a great thing. It pushes the player to explore all the options, further explore the world, and collect the gear they need before progressing the main story. Outside of the quest, The Witcher 3 has a fair bit of side content, such as Witcher contracts, which I thought were an excellent way to showcase the world building by itself, given the stories behind the contract, the involvement of NPCs, and often revolving around unique enemies, which all have their own information in the bestiary, which is a small, fun little way to increase the context of the world, in turn making the story richer and more expansive. There are also treasure hunts, monster nests, and caves to explore. These are rather self-explanatory. Obviously, the treasure hunts revolve around finding treasure to create or find better gear. The monster nests are areas that need clearing of monsters, often leaving Geralt to burn or blow up the nests. I thought they were quite cool as they provide a different way to engage with enemies outside of certain environments. Lastly, the caves are quite cool. They're expansive and quite varied in design, allowing you to freely explore, fight enemies, and collect loot. The game also features a card game called Gwent, but unlike Queen's Blood, I couldn't really understand or get into it, so I guess I'll need to pick it up in my own time. One point of world building that I think stands out in The Witcher compared to the other games I'll be covering today is that the world building is also expanded through Geralt's experience as a Witcher, how NPCs react to his presence in the world, the discrimination involved, and how different the Witcher lifestyle is to everyone else's. I thought this was a fantastic way to expand on the key principles of world building. It avoids the need for expositions, and I think that's also a given considering there are two other games which set the stage. Oh, and also, just quickly, the music and sound design in this game is fantastic. It's incredibly diverse but completes the game, and I know I didn't mention it earlier, but the DLC are fantastic as well, especially Blood and Wine. If you're a big fan of the Witcher franchise, then you might be able to guess which game I'll be talking about next. Here, I'll give you a second to think. If you guessed Call of Duty, you couldn't have been more wrong. Of course I'm talking about Cyberpunk 2077. Given how they're both produced by CD Projekt Red, it should have been quite obvious. However, if you guessed something else, please let me know as well, even if it's ridiculously far off. But I feel like Cyberpunk 2077 needs no introduction. Given its infamous launch and its incredible redemption story, Night City is one of the finest with regards to world building in gaming currently. Now, the game has always been excellent at telling a great story, but was overshadowed at launch due to the extensive bugs and performance issues, but now it's one of the most enjoyable games, which continues to leave me stunned every time I pick it up. Both a visually beautiful game and an incredibly rich one. For me, it's up there with the best. But instead of me just endlessly praising the game, let me talk about how the world building on display in this game makes the overall experience unforgettable. Firstly, the dystopian nature of the future is incredibly intriguing. It's so separate from our everyday life, but it seems to be a warning of the direction the world is heading in, with major corporations like Arasaka, Militech and Biotechnica having deep connections all throughout society and the political world. I actually want to talk about the side content the game offers next. Although the NCPD scanner missions are largely repetitive, it's a self-contained story, with many data shards containing conversations, stories and little hacking tasks to unlock sensitive information. This alone adds so much depth to the world, making everything seem so alive, and adds so much emotion to NPCs that otherwise would have been overlooked if it was thrown into the story as an exposition. As we all know, Night City is unforgiving and it's a steep price to pay if you want to be remembered as a legend. I'd like to next look at the quests and gigs the game has, with each district having their own fixer, along with a multitude of gigs available that become more challenging as you build your reputation and work in each district. This is a more subtle piece of world building that occurs in the background while we work through our quests. Connections are being made, and if you're attentive in the debriefs and quest calls, it slowly sets the stage for the story being told, whether that's the next quest you go after or the main story. Even though it's not available for us to directly experience, the foundations are being laid and the story continues to expand. As I've mentioned when speaking about the other two games, Cyberpunk has incredible environmental design. There are more vertical environments. Even if not every building has things to offer like The Witcher, it works incredibly well to show the scale of the world here. Districts for the most part are unique in their design, which makes travelling to and from these places more enjoyable. Although there is a fast travel system, you never really feel the need to use it, as driving around the world is almost therapeutic. Seeing the world move around you as you're solidifying yourself as the next big thing is such a nice change of pace, making the game feel more alive. I feel like this subtly engages the player and quietly adds to the playtime, as I found myself just driving around the world in between tying up loose ends before progressing the main story, solidifying the world building that takes place throughout. I'd also like to mention the sound design once more. Cyberpunk has an incredible music and sound design. If you want to look at it from the standpoint of the guns, each gun feels distinct and has unique sounds, and it's this small feature that over time makes a difference. Even the names of these guns adds to the world building, and how you acquire them makes it more memorable. The sounds of the city life as you're exploring it is almost overwhelming. There's always so much going on, whether it's the NPCs being confrontational or the loud sounds of the vehicles and the adverts. Everything sounds right, and it really helps to build immersion. As much as I wanted to keep this video nice and concise, there was no way I could talk about world building without talking about Elden Ring, so I lied. I said I was going to go in depth about 3 games that excel in world building, but here is number 4. Admittedly, I was torn between speaking about Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, but the more I thought about it, the more Elden Ring made sense. Elden Ring is renowned for its challenge and open world, and although the story is never a simple thing to understand, that's part of what makes it so good. The foundations of the story were created from George R.R. Martin, and in FromSoft fashion, it was taken and was made so multi-dimensional that people have worked hours to compile the story into one complete telling, with new lore videos even coming out after nearly 4 years. Immediately, the depth of the story sets the world building off to a great start. Items like weapons, armor, and accessories all have short pieces of dialogue attached, which are almost entirely unique, further making the world more expansive. A lot of the storytelling is done through your gameplay experience, which also allows the stage for your story to be more flexible, especially seeing as Elden Ring is open world. It's not the same story being told every time. You may decide to tackle bosses and dungeons in an entirely different order to your friends. Quests are unique to the characters involved, and the nature of these quests also work excellently to further build the history, set the stage, and tell a story, in turn building a richer world. Unlike the other games I've spoken about in this video, there is no direct way to track the quests you've acquired and completed. This in its own right is good for storytelling. You get to work on them at your own pace and develop your character alongside the exploration of these areas and completion of the quests, in turn telling its own story to further work with the quest. And like the other games, the environmental design is amazing. So much of the lands between is diverse. Even just looking at the maps, you can tell that the scale of the world is rich, vast enough for you to explore every inch and still find new things for several hours, and this isn't even including the underground maps, which are large as well. Hell, even the DLC Shadow the Erdtree covers a huge space. Environmental design was one of the factors that made the experience for Elden Ring so profound and enjoyable. For me, the best part of Elden Ring's world building is the boss fights. They're so incredibly diverse, with unique backstories, cutscenes, and music. Your fights with them push the narrative, and it's the outcome of these fights that change the land between, making it so immersive and unforgettable. You've probably heard me go on for too long now, and that allows me to nicely conclude this video. If you're wanting to adventure into reviewing video games and other media, stuff like world building is the difference maker between a good experience and an incredible experience. Of course, the leading factor into reviews is our feelings, what we liked about it and what could have been better, but understanding game aspects also makes reviewing stuff more expansive and insightful. I know this video is different to any other content I've produced on my channel so far, and for that I'm really glad you stuck with me on this one, but if there are any other aspects you want me to do a deeper dive into, then please let me know and I can work on producing more helpful content. Also, let me know how you found the editing. It's a little different from what I normally do, so any feedback on that would be greatly appreciated. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Maybe let me know if there were any games you also think showed great world building that deserved mentioning here. If you haven't already, consider subscribing. It would help me to continue producing these reviews and encourage me to explore different avenues of content. Thanks again for your time with this one. I hope you all have a good day, and who knows, maybe I'll see you soon.
I'm not a child anymore. I'm 48.
40 what?